Anytime a vintage toy line was met with all-around praise and successful sales upon its first year of release, a sequel series in its second year was almost always a guarantee. And during the glory days of the 1980s Saturday morning cartoons, we most certainly saw the launch of one successful toy line after another, year after year, resulting in a colorful, enjoyable, and timeless era of action figure products. The year 1985 represented a landmark 12-month cycle in the history of professional wrestling. The WWE, known as the WWF, or World Wrestling Federation at the time, had made the controversial choice to push its brand nationwide and eventually also distribute its product internationally as well. All of this went against the established agreement among old-school wrestling promoters during this time period. What I mean by this, for those who are not quite familiar, is that wrestling had been segmented into region-focused territories back in the old days, with individual promoters sticking to their assigned areas under an agreement with the governing National Wrestling Alliance, or NWA. Having previously broken away from the NWA many years earlier, the WWF was treated as an independent organization, but still largely seen in the wrestling industry as strictly being a northeastern-based American territory. However, with the oncoming and progressively widespread availability of national cable coverage shifting the old ways of television distribution into what would become the new ways, the WWF elected to break regional boundary agreements. This resulted in their event schedule touring nationwide and distributing their product on the airwaves from coast to coast, a choice that resulted in the genesis of WrestleMania, the first of which was held in March of 1985. With all that backstory in mind, I feel I've set the stage for the climate of the wrestling culture at this time. As such, I'll be revisiting the action figures that were dominant during the same calendar year and explore the sophomore season of the rubberized LJN WWF Superstar lineup of toys. Let's begin. Followers of this channel will know that I've been slowly compiling a year-by-year toy history series of the LJN WWF Superstars figures, and by now I've set up a playlist including videos bookending this series of toys, namely the Series 1 video detailing the 1984 releases, as well as the final year of figures in 1989 when the line was taken over by the smaller company known as Grand Toys. Have a look at these past videos if you find yourself with some free time and wish to flesh out more of this line's history. While the initial 1984 wave consisted of an extended lineup of 9 figures as detailed in the aforementioned Series 1 history video, 1985 Series 2 contained a smaller cast featuring just 6 characters. Namely, we've got Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, George the Animal Steele, King Kong Bundy, the tag team of Brutus Beefcake and Greg Valentine, and the first character to see a second release, Andre the Giant, now with his shorter-haired appearance. And to directly market some of these characters, we had the aforementioned closed-circuit style events like WrestleMania, but we also had primetime programming such as the inception of Saturday Night's Main Event in the spring of 1985, and also episodes of Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling cartoon series that would debut in the fall of 1985. Now, as we look at the character lineup, beginning with the big man himself, I will point out that this appearance of Andre the Giant has a far more accurate look to the human being himself by comparison to his Series 1 1984 figure. I'm not quite sure what prompted the change, but I can only say that I am happier with this version of the character in the short trunks and before his days as a heel in the black singlet. I can honestly also say that I immediately think of his Body Slam Challenge match at the aforementioned WrestleMania 1, as well as the following year's WrestleMania Battle Royal, which would see the big man successful in this match as well. Either way, Andre the Giant is a cornerstone piece to any old school wrestling collection representing the glory days of the 1980s. I will note that the paint on my figure has seen better days, but I did have a strangely hard time tracking this particular figure down, so I'm just happy to have it in any case. 1985 also saw a pivotal year for a man who was both an arch rival and eventually an ally of Hulk Hogan, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Together with Rowdy Roddy Piper and Cowboy Bob Orton, they would team up to take on the Hulkster and friends at the inaugural WrestleMania, a loss that would see the split in tag team between Orndorff and Piper. I've always personally felt that Paul Orndorff, with his incredible strength and physique, was a bit underrated even in this era of wrestling. Now, while he was generally a legit main eventer at this time, I found that he was sometimes not given the spotlight he deserved due to being seen as something of a support character to the likes of Hogan, Piper, Andre, or Macho Man Randy Savage. Moving on, while we did get a tag team in the inaugural year of LJN's WWF Superstars, namely Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik, this second year would see the tandem release of Brutus Beefcake and Greg Valentine, aka the Dream Team, who were both released as part of this wave. This, of course, was all before Brutus Beefcake eventually was known in his more popular Barber gimmick and teaming with Hulk Hogan, and also for Valentine in his case, it was before his days as a team with the Honky Tonk Man. Note that Brutus Beefcake and Greg Valentine's manager, Johnny Valiant, wouldn't see a release until Series 5 later down the line. As for filling an attraction of sorts in the mid-card scene, who could ever forget the turnbuckle-eating man savage himself, George the Animal Steele. In an era where the characters were at their most colorful, cartoonish, and sometimes a little over the top, George's name is among those who spring to mind first. One interesting thing for me about George the Animal is, as a fan of wrestling, I tend to think more about his outlandish facial expressions, his over-exaggerated mannerisms, and his turnbuckle munching habits before thinking about any of the matches he was actually in. In fact, I can't even remember if he won more often than he lost, and most often just think of him as among the memorable characters who would otherwise fill out the timeless cast of WWF Superstars during the 1980s. Rounding out the character wave of six figures during this 1985 year was King Kong Bundy. A natural heel and member of the famed Heenan family stable, Bundy was yet another one of those immovable objects in the ring who would give a hard time to the good guys that we were meant to cheer for. Now, it wouldn't be until 1986 that we would see King Kong Bundy in the main event of the second ever WrestleMania with the Hulkster, but the sight of Bundy inside this steel cage is a key memory that I often associate him with, along with the tag team matches where he'd find himself teamed up with fellow Heenan family stable member Big John Studd. This second year would also see the release of the much-needed Sling 'em Fling 'em wrestling ring. Now, at the time of this video, I no longer have one of these in my collection, and if I knew I was going to be making this video, I probably would have kept my previous one a little longer, at least until this video would be filmed. The key thing with the wrestling ring is that it gave us a permanent setting to host our events and play match booker in the comfort of our own homes. The addition of the solid blue steel cage accessory for main event matches is another nice touch to add to this playset. Also, if you want to know more about the Sling 'em Fling 'em wrestling ring and steel cage, have a look at my top 10 playsets countdown list on my channel's back catalog. Spoiler alert, I do talk about this ring and cage in some way, shape, or form, but I suppose with my love of pro wrestling, this won't come as a shock to anyone. In any case, this series of figures represents LJN not just opening the doors to a new toy line, but a year where they really hit the ground running. Now, when we look at the cast of characters here, it is mostly memorable guys that don't quite have the exact star power of a Hulk Hogan or a Roddy Piper, though we are getting a second release of Andre the Giant here. Similarly, the figures here don't have the perpetually hard to find exorbitant prices of the very last series in 1989 that would be issued. All that being said, this lineup of colorful characters, in my opinion, is necessary for fleshing out any desirable 1980s lineup. And like any of the figures in this overall series, the toys here are not articulated at all, mostly being reliant on the iconic style poses and being durable in nature compared to the more fragile figures of the same era. What I am saying overall is that while I appreciate the Series 2 1985 grouping that LJN released, I do see these guys more as augmentation to the main characters on my shelf. All the while, I've noted the pivotal nature and landscape of 1985 as a year where the wrestling industry saw some seismic business-wide changes and a shift in commercialized product that I mentioned in the earlier part of this video. Now, as viewers of this channel, let me know in the comments section, did you own any of these figures in your youth, or did you track them down later as an adult, or do you just like enjoying them from afar through the eyes of your fellow collector? Either way, let me know. And before we sign off, I'd just like to give a special thanks to my Patreon supporters whose names can be found in the description section of this video. Visit patreon.com/toyconnections if you're able to help this channel in its growth. Also, check out some of my other videos, including other wrestling related content here. Subscribe to my channel if you already haven't, press the like button to spread this video to more viewers, and share it with your friends. And with that, I will see you again soon with some more of my favorite toys. Take care.